Remember back in the day when Wikileaks was in the news all the time? Julian Assange was being asked about stuff. He wasn't just being, bundled from one embassy to another prison and the next. Wikileaks caught a lot of heat, and it remains pretty controversial depending on who you ask today. In today's classic episode from 2016, we looked at a strange event, a strange incident that occurred when WikiLeaks released a bundle of internal emails from the Democratic National Committee.
Yep. And you could really just look at these emails as the birth of QAnon, really. Interestingly enough. It's weird how that happens. I don't know what to say about this one, guys. The whole Russian hacker angle that exists in this episode, and then if you just kind of follow the trail of history from this moment back in about mid 2016 onwards, it gets weird. So I'm really interested to listen to this one again.
From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
Oh, gosh, you guys.
Ben?
Yeah, it's me. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt and Noel, and even those of you in the listening audience who are perhaps not gentlefolk, even the rough and the rapscallions. This is stuff they don't want you to know. This is an episode where we're doing something we don't always do, by which I mean we are talking about an event that is going on currently.
Yes.
Not an historical thing, not a hypothetical thing. We're talking about something topical, which means that we need to put out some disclaimers. So, maybe we could all say disclaimer together 3 times to make sure that it's palpable for people.
I think we should just do an oath. Should put our hands in and do an oath.
What?
Just say the thing.
All right.
Okay, very well. So, this is going to be an episode that touches on WikiLeaks, that touches on politics. In this episode, we are providing facts and objective information, which means that if there are partisans on one side of the political divide or the other, they may not like the facts. However, facts, like numbers, do not have opinions.
They have no affiliation.
They have very little affiliation. And also, perhaps even more importantly, some of the information that we are exploring today may change as more stuff comes to light or is available.
So like many of you, we've spent the last 2 weeks browsing through the internet, watching live feeds about the conventions that are occurring in the United States. Maybe you don't live here, maybe you aren't watching, or maybe you don't live here and you are watching because you're interested in what the most powerful country in the world, in quotes there.
Just doing quotation fingers, y'all. Just give you a visual aid.
Well, yeah, it is interesting to see where it's going, right? And you may have seen some stuff in the news, especially about an organization called WikiLeaks.
Right. So as we're recording this, this podcast should be coming to you on the 29th of July. And at this point, the U.S. presidential election seems set on a contest between 2 people. It would be the campaign of Donald Trump and the campaign of Hillary Clinton. In the course of this campaign season, several strange things emerged. Both of these figures have had controversies, to say the least, in the past, right? And one of the things that's different about this election, about recent elections around the world and here in the U.S., is the emergence of online whistleblowing. Mm-hmm. And it's the old question we've asked before, are there more skeletons in closets now, or is it just easier to open the closet?
There's more light to be shined in there. It's easier to get a flashlight.
There may be bigger closets, too.
Yeah, there may be walk-ins. If you are listening to this show, of course, you have heard of WikiLeaks, but if somehow you have not, here is a brief recap. WikiLeaks is a non-profit organization that's dedicated to publishing anonymous news leaks, including, correspondence between governments or government departments, stuff from banks, corporate memos. This was first instituted in 2006 in Iceland. At least that's when the website came out via an organization known as Sunshine Press. By 2007, WikiLeaks claimed to have amassed millions, 1.2 million different documents. Most people associate WikiLeaks with a guy named Julian Assange. Julian Assange is an Australian national, but for the past few years, he's been trapped in the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
4 years he's been there.
Because of allegations of sexual misconduct?
Yes, because of allegations of sexual misconduct. And those allegations came in Sweden, but he is adamant that if he leaves the embassy and goes to Sweden, he will be extradited to the United States.
And we're talking physically walks out the front door.
Right. And London has spent a lot of money watching that front door and probably the side doors.
And the back doors and the windows.
the back doors and the basements. So he is one of the only people that are publicly known to be a member of WikiLeaks. He is the founder, editor-in-chief, and director. But there are some other names there: Sarah Harrison, Joseph Farrell, and Christina Hrafnsson.
Yes, and there are several. No one knows exactly how many people are in WikiLeaks or would call themselves members of WikiLeaks who are doing the operations.
Right. I mean, let's face it, WikiLeaker is a weird thing to call oneself.
Sure, but the things that they do require lots of hands, lots of eyes.
Right. Yeah, massive amounts of information, and they're legit. They've done things in the past that, whether or not you agree with their methods, have turned out to be true.
And they've always protected their sources, which makes them a good place for people that are wanting to do a large-scale whistleblowing to, funnel their information through them so they can stay out of the picture, because they have always done a very good job of maintaining the anonymity of their sources.
Right. If you want to learn the inner secrets of Scientology, you have WikiLeaks to thank. They are the reason you can find that stuff online right now, all the way up through the OTs.
Oh yeah.
And they also released the British National Party membership. They also released Afghan war logs. They also released Sarah Palin's email account info. Now, it's important here to say that WikiLeaks themselves are not the people going into these databases. They're receiving the information and they're dispersing it. They're distributing it like the way like a movie studio might distribute a movie that they didn't make.
They're like a fence of information.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. The WikiLeak that I remember the most were the collateral murder videos. Do you guys remember those in 2010?
I remember that one, and I also remember the massive amount of diplomatic papers and dossiers that they released.
Yeah,
wow, that seemed like that was the one that made the biggest splash early on that I can remember.
Right. And so WikiLeaks surfaced in the mainstream news again quite recently, and they surfaced because they released leaked emails that confirmed some things that the Bernie Sanders campaign had been arguing, and not just the Sanders campaign, but other voices in the room, in the digital echo chamber of modern media. So what did they say?
On Friday, July 22nd, WikiLeaks released 20,000 internal Democratic National Committee emails. These ranged from January 2015 to May 2016, and this was 3 days prior to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia this week.
And again, as they have done very well in the past, they refused to reveal the source of the leaked email. But in June, a hacker using the name Guccifer, or as I like to say, Guccifer, because, like Gucci Mane, 2.0, claimed responsibility for the hacking into the DNC's computer network. And then on Sunday, 24th of July, the Hillary Clinton campaign manager claimed that the emails were leaked by, quote, Russians for the purposes of helping Donald Trump, end quote.
So that's interesting because the content of the emails, we'll explore the idea of the source of these later in the show, but the content of these emails didn't make the DNC look particularly good. They did not, at this point, show any outright illegal behavior.
No, it showed a couple of things like, well, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but it showed preferential treatment to people who donated a whole lot of money.
And a very clear bias against the Sanders campaign, which, you know, they alleged all along. Right before the Iowa caucuses, there was a data breach into the DNC's networks that exposed some, I guess you could call it proprietary candidate information, as far as, you know, different donors and information like that for the Sanders camp versus the Clinton camp. And the Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic National Committee basically penalized the Bernie Sanders campaign because it came from one of their employees. And then Sanders threatened to sue the DNC because they were withholding this proprietary information almost as retribution for this breach, which I think is kind of interesting and a little bit ironic considering what has happened now. But he alleged that they were giving Clinton preferential treatment, and now with the leaking of these 20,000 emails, that can be made much more palpable when you kind of really dig into it.
Sure. And we have some examples of stuff from this email chain.
Here's a good quote. It might make no difference, but for Kentucky and West Virginia, can we get someone to ask his belief? This is referring to Senator Sanders.
Well, it's thought that it's referring to Senator Sanders.
Fair enough.
They don't actually use his name.
Mm-hmm. Does he believe in a God? He had skated on saying he has a Jewish heritage. I think I read he is an atheist. This could make several points difference with my peeps, my Southern Baptist peeps. Love the use of the word peeps here. Would draw a big difference between a Jew and an atheist. This is from Brad Marshall, the DNC chief financial officer.
And then we have Mark Postenbach, National Press Secretary, who says, I'm wondering if there's a good Bernie narrative for a story, which is that Bernie never ever had his act together and that his campaign is a mess. That's not the way Mark probably sounds. I just wanted to do that voice.
I was going to say, if he got the job of National Press Secretary with that voice, that guy he's a smooth talker, maybe not with his accent.
So they show that, you know, also as we said earlier, that the big donors were given special treatment, which to me is not a surprise because that happens in most situations in U.S. politics.
It's one of those things that you don't really want people to think about too much.
Right.
At least people who are donating, you know, like you listening or us speaking here, who can only give a certain amount of money. You won't be able to sit down in a room or maybe sit next to Barack Obama during some event.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is where it gets interesting because shortly after this, on July 24th, the chairwoman of the DNC resigned. This is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was working with the former Clinton campaign run
in 2008.
For president in 2008, and as a representative from Florida. And for people who were fans of Bernie Sanders, this seemed to be a conflict of interest. To have this person holding office at the DNC when, you know, previously they had supported a specific Democratic candidate.
She ran the campaign, right?
So this can all sound a little bit dry, a little bit policy wonky, inside baseball, but it is important because if this information is true, while it does not at this point indicate an illegal act, it does indicate a disingenuous approach, right? A difference between what was publicly stated by this organization, what was privately acted upon. And the other side of the political aisle is, of course, having a field day with this.
Yeah.
You can check out numerous statements by the other presidential frontrunner, the big one, right?
Yeah, tweets. You can see tweets.
Right. Yeah, you can see numerous tweets from Donald Trump's campaign regarding this. So this has given some fire to the supporters of the former Bernie Sanders campaign, and there was audible dissent.
Yeah.
people were booing the crowd and people were cheering to outweigh the boos, and the crowd was fighting with itself. And it seems like many of these people who are supporting Sanders are deciding
They were shouting shame, like that scene in Game of Thrones.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this, of course, does not look like a very unified approach. And then on the other side of the political aisle, for different reasons, there's a lot of dissent in the conservative conventions, right? Mm-hmm. And the question about WikiLeaks, though, the reason this is not over yet, well, this is a current event, is because Julian Assange, when talking about this, Julian Assange also said that his next leaks will ensure the arrest of Hillary Clinton.
Right. And, that's a bit of a frightening idea that one of the top people to become president could be arrested for doing wrong things. It feels like a movie.
And how much of that is just hyperbole?
Perhaps.
How much of that is WikiLeaks marketing itself? And where did these come from?
That's the big question.
But first, a word from our sponsor. Here's where it gets crazy.
During an interview with CNN on July 24th, Robbie Mook, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, cited some unnamed experts, which is a tactic.
You hear my Marge Simpson noise?
Yeah, that's
okay,
a tactic we've heard.
We'll get to it.
These unnamed experts believe that, quote, the Russians are to blame for these DNC email leaks. And we have a quote from him. Noel, would you be so kind?
Just FYI, this is conversational. This is not printed from a book or a journal. This is a guy kind of stammering a little bit, so I'm going to try to do that justice. What's disturbing to us is that we experts are telling us that Russian state actors broke into the DNC, stole these emails, and other experts are now telling us that the Russians are releasing these emails for the purposes of actually helping Donald Trump. I don't think it's coincidental that these emails were released on the eve of our convention here. We also saw last week at the Republican convention that Trump and his allies made changes to the Republican platform to make it more pro-Russian. Boom.
So it's interesting there, right? When we explore this statement, on the Russian side, the Russian government responded as well. On Thursday, Kremlin spokesperson named Dmitry Peskov said accusations of a Russian hand in hacking Democratic emails bordered on total stupidity.
How do you say that in Russian?
I feel like it's just going to be one word. Yeah. I feel like it comes up. And were motivated by what he said was an anti-Russian sentiment.
Yeah, his quick quote is, as regards these emails, batches, that is not our headache. We never poke our noses into others' affairs. Mm-hmm. And we really don't like it when people try to poke their noses into ours.
Ben, so, is this Russian notion just coming from this guy Mook? This Mook?
From the campaign manager. That's an interesting question because as you all heard, I can't allow an unnamed expert to pass,
right.
Because in the U.S., places like the Washington Post or New York Times, or other publications of note will often use that or will publish something like that or a claim like that comes from an anonymous source. And what this allows people to do is release an I'm just saying kind of thing without responsibility or culpability or accountability, right? So it's a thing that happens often when, let's say, a member of the military or the government needs something out there, but at an arm's remove, so they can say, I didn't actually say that. So then, for instance, a Pentagon spokesperson would say something off the record, and you'll hear unnamed official with the Pentagon says blah, blah, blah. And this kind of technique is invidious and it's dangerous and it occurs so often. If you haven't noticed it before, now you will notice it over and over and over again, especially in mainstream news.
Back when I used to work for public radio, we were never allowed to use unnamed sources, period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think what ends up happening is when the topic is so hush-hush and under wraps, I think it can shed a little bit of light on an area that otherwise would be completely murky.
Sure.
And you use that as a caveat. And, you know, that is being truthful if you're putting it out there and saying, hey, this is not confirmed, but it's the equivalent of saying, hey, somebody said, I heard. That's what Trump says all the time. You know, it's like people say this thing.
But it does kind of stink because if you're an effective journalist, you have sources that are embedded in places that have close ties or maybe are experts, but they just don't want their name out there associated with this, right?
Well, hell, man, it's the same as what's going on with the WikiLeaks in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know,
Right.
I mean, that's maintaining the anonymity of a source, and it doesn't make the source material any less valid if it can be confirmed and people respond to it.
So yeah, if we were talking about rather than a statement from an unnamed expert and we were looking at a document, let's say that was showing that it came somehow from a Russian source, then it would be different.
Well, okay, for instance, just a totally different example, for antagonizing, Iran or something like that, then there would be a statement that's like, an unnamed source in the Pentagon said that Iran is playing a brinksmanship game that it will lose, and particularly noted the continuing war exercises at the Strait of Hormuz or something. And that's clearly a threat from a government to another government. But now it's an I'm just saying. Mm-hmm. And I think you make an excellent point, Noel, regarding the sort of double-sided axe here, the double-edged blade, because we cannot praise one place on a blanket scale for its anonymity while vilifying another side for essentially doing the same thing. But I want to point out this story that broke in the New York Times on the 25th of July. They said proving the source of a cyber attack is notoriously difficult, which is true. Mm-hmm. And then they say, but researchers have concluded that the National Committee was breached by 2 Russian intelligence agencies, which were the same attackers behind previous Russian cyber operations at the White House, the State Department, and the Joint Chief of Staff last year. They also say that metadata from the hacked emails suggests they passed through Russian computers. And even though a hacker claimed responsibility for giving these to WikiLeaks, the same agencies, those Russian intelligence agencies, are the prime suspects.
There's actually a Times article from the very next day that just says American intelligence, quote, American intelligence agencies have told the White House they now have high confidence that the Russian government was behind the theft of emails and documents from the DNC, according to federal officials who have been briefed on the evidence. Mm-hmm. What is interesting, though, is that they attribute it to, quote, fairly routine cyber espionage, which the U.S. takes part in as well. I mean, we're always poking our nose around other countries' business, trying to just test the waters and make sure no one's up to any kind of terrorist activities.
Right.
Whatever, you know? I'm just saying. Yeah, it's interesting.
The biggest thing for me is proving that is in fact the IP address where things came from, or if there were markers inside somewhere that were left that you could prove that this happened, because anyone who is sufficiently sophisticated enough to do one of these attacks, you have the ability to cover up your tracks, at least to a large extent.
And you have to wonder too, if the intent was in fact to manipulate an election, because what's coming out now is that there is suspicion that Trump isn't releasing his tax returns because it will show business dealings with Russian oligarchs.
Right.
And therein lies a, motivation perhaps for him to perhaps, be in collusion with the Russian government to help manipulate and swing things in his favor.
Sure.
There's also a possibility that this was done as a routine thing and that some individual decided to leak it to WikiLeaks.
I think that's a good point, because we have to remember that it's often just an individual who becomes a whistleblower, but there's a bubble that occurs, right, in media. And right now, there are questions that are not being asked that should be asked. such as how much do we actually know as a nation about the militarized cyber side of the Russian government? We know a little bit about the Chinese government's relationship with hackers, but the Russian intelligence agencies and their cyber attack arms are relative black holes in the West. And usually when a country is hacking another country, they're looking for security stuff. They're looking for federal level things. Is it a little self-important to think that an entire country would care to that level? And if they were capable of doing that, then why didn't they do more? Yeah. Why would it be such a weird little thing about, they said something sort of sleazy about someone's religion of all things to hack?
Well, I was trying to imagine taking that route if it was truly state actors, of going through WikiLeaks to have it come out, if from a strategic standpoint, right, to maybe hide the fact that it is you, right? That it is the state releasing it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, also the military intelligence, their resources are stretched. They don't have all the time and manpower. So this also, I don't know, this doesn't quite add up, because I don't think there's any solid proof. There's high confidence, right, in the New York Times.
What did our buddy Snowden have to say about it?
I'm glad you asked. He weighed in, and he did say that if a leak occurred or a hack occurred from the Russian side, from a state actor, then the NSA would know about it, would certainly know about it. And also, let's not forget that Russia popping up in the news like this is a convenient reminder to Uncle Sam that Edward Snowden got away and is living, well, not the high life, but he's living a life outside of a jail in Russia. And so he also has had some recent conflicts with Julian Assange because, WikiLeaks just wants to release everything of a searchable database. Whereas Snowden says there should be some sort of curation.
Yeah, journalistic integrity that goes
Right. Like if we're going to be harming people's lives or endangering people by releasing it.
And that occurred to me here too. I mean, this does seem like a pretty targeted release, to bring negative attention to the Democratic Party in a time where many would argue that, the alternative could be disastrous, shall we say? Yeah. So it makes me wonder, do Assange and his folks just kind of want to watch the world burn?
And also, the stuff they don't want you to know here is the source of the leak. It reminds me of the Sony hacks, a few years back when these rampant, increasingly odd accusations came forward, and people were saying North Korean government hacked Sony because they didn't like that movie.
Seth Rogen movie.
Yeah, because that was on the high on the priorities of an entire country. It was a Seth Rogen movie. So there's another theory here, which, Matt, you found.
And as if this isn't enough to think about and mull over, there are other theories that are coming out of the woodwork on our conspiracy. Oh my gosh, if you aren't on there, go over to the subreddit our conspiracy and just look at that thing. It's all kinds of different ideas about what's going on and why. One of them that I found is from Richard Manzo, who is writing for Regated.com. And Noel, you said you actually found this as well.
Yeah, I saw a meme that just kind of was, sort of an informational one that was trying to connect some dots here. And it just, all you can do is look at this at its face value. I don't know that there have been any specifics that have been released from this leak that lends any credence to this, but it sure is interesting that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the ousted DNC chair, was Hillary Clinton's campaign chair when she was running against Barack Obama.
In 2008,
In 2008, exactly. And at the time, the chair of the DNC was Tim Kaine.
Well, in 2009.
Correct. But if you're going to do a little backroom dealings and say, hey, how can I install this person who is loyal to me as the chair of the Democratic National Committee, the body that will or will not help me get nominated for the presidency, I'm going to need the person that's in that job to step down and recommend my pick. And that's exactly what happened with Tim Kaine. But in order to do that, you kind of got to promise Kaine something, don't you? What might that be? Maybe my VP pick? I don't know.
Oh, I thought it's not going to, I thought it was going to be, some concert tickets.
Yeah.
Like Steely Dan or something.
And, as you noted, Noel, there is absolutely no evidence to support this besides the circumstantial stuff of what's happening. But it is, it does seem like it would make a good storyline for House of Cards, right?
And I mean, again, we're not trying to get into opinions here, but we know that there are those that distrust Hillary Clinton to a degree because she has a sort of interesting relationship with the truth, shall we say, in that she's changed stories several times in very high profile ways. I'm not saying that she is not truthful, but there have been examples multiple times of her telling different versions of stories and, quote, misremembering things. And,
Sure.
And she comes from just a massive political dynasty. Her husband was the president.
Right.
She was probably one of the most activist first ladies that we've seen, and has held high level positions in the government ever since.
But it's not as if, I'm not going to engage in whataboutism or arguing in defense of anyone actually in this race. But, we see that on both sides.
Sure.
This sort of twisting narrative. And I can completely see this being a revenge leak from a domestic source, because again, it's strange and it's a neat explanation to say that there's a Russian implication, but how do we know, like you said, Noel, that it wasn't an individual? How do we...
With a vendetta.
Right. At this point, a lot of what you are going to hear regarding this will be largely speculation tarted up to look like fact.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's the world in which we live. But Julian Assange's statement also makes me wonder, are we going to encounter more releases here? It brings us to a bigger issue. All right, so if Russia is implicated, what's going to happen is that eventually there will be some sort of proof that will emerge, right? And what's going to happen with Snowden and Assange is that they're still going to stay in limbo for a while unless they get some kind of pardon from whomever becomes president next, which is, honestly probably not going to happen, regardless of who gets elected. But the much, much bigger issue here, and I think it's one that's explored by think tanks pretty often. I think it's one that's explored by policymakers, but not as often as it should be in the average news, is what kind of world, what kind of electoral processes are we going to encounter when a non-governmental, non-profit, private organization can affect something so powerful? A single anonymous individual could topple an institution. If the right person with the access to the right stuff decides that they want to, as you said, Noel, watch the world burn, then they can just release nuclear codes.
Well, and in the same way that technology has closed the gap in terms of creators, for example, now anyone can be a filmmaker. Anyone can, has the wherewithal to get a computer with GarageBand could make an album. On the same token, anyone with access to this information, whether they work within a company, within a government organization, it is easier now than it ever has been to affect real change, be it positive or negative.
Mm-hmm. And we're increasingly seeing distrust of the media that use the days of the trustworthy anchor with the patriarchal fireside voice, just telling you what is what and who is who and so. Those days are gone. People don't believe in that kind of thing anymore. And, should we have in the beginning? And what we're seeing now is just these various competing, conflicting narratives. Overall, it is hopefully a good thing because it allows...
It's a great equalizer.
Yeah, it allows people, ourselves included, to see both sides of an argument, despite the internet filter and search bubble, which is real. We've talked about that in the past, how your past searches will indicate your opinion about something and how Google or another search engine will cater to that opinion. And the same thing, of course, happens with your Instagram, your Facebook
Did you see that Facebook admitted to filtering out DNC leak stories?
Yes, and they didn't say why they did it. They also were showing preferential treatment to or killing conservative perspective things. And I think Facebook is one of the most garbage forums on earth to have a serious conversation about religion, money, love, or politics.
Like I said, it's a great aggregator of different sources. I love it for that. That is where I get my news. In terms of, I've subscribed to different pages and, it's meme pages. That's where I live right now in the world of memes because the real world's kind of ugly. But yeah, God, don't ever try to get into a back and forth, God forbid, with one of your friends with an extreme opposing viewpoint as you. It is danger. Danger, Will Robinson. It's bad times. Don't do it.
Yes.
Where are we at with this, though, man? This is obviously a continuing story.
Right.
This is obviously something we're going to keep seeing. With these leaks, you always have a massive volume, and so it takes time to dig through and find the tasty bits. We've obviously found a few, but what's next?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something that we would like your help answering, ladies and gentlemen. We can say if Julian Assange is telling the truth, then there will be other leaks to follow. As we record this, some voicemails were recently released, which we're still sorting through.
They were a part of the leaks. It's just they were kind of hidden throughout it.
Yeah.
And there was a user on Reddit that went through and made a transcription, which was really nice. So you could, or at least a basic transcription.
Sure.
So you could see what they are without having to filter through them.
And it's easy to get lost in the wash of information because now it's no longer a needle in a haystack situation. The truth was hidden in the 50s by being suppressed. Now the truth is hidden by being part of a glut of information.
Let's not forget about the crowdsourcing side of this. You release this massive dump and there are enough people with enough time on their hands that if you work together, independently, but yet as kind of a swarm of people, you're gonna dig through and find the stuff much quicker,
Yes. And speaking of crowdsourcing, we're going to put a pause on this for now and wait for more information to develop. We would like to hear from you. Is there something to this Russian allegation? Does WikiLeaks have damaging political information? This is a whodunit. And pretty soon, it may be a whodathunk-it. And sadly, often with these cases, maybe it will be gone in a week and we won't hear about it again, save for this strange episode of this podcast. But before we go today, speaking of our amazing listeners, I think it's time for Shout Out Corner. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, our shout-out corner. Our first shout-out comes to us via Christopher H. Christopher H. says, "Hey guys, love the show. It keeps me full of facts during my long hours driving at work. Recently read a book titled The Truth About Dishonesty and found it absolutely fascinating. It explains and questions the idea of cheating and how it is universal. Several of the experiments made me question the nature of mankind, but I know and see how the world works a bit clearer. I also believe Netflix has released a video version explaining the experiments within. I thought it'd be a good idea to do a podcast on cheating and believing our own lies, as it ties in nicely with issues at the heart of banking, politics, and sports. Hope this finds you well. Shout out from rainy Scotland and to the love of my life, Zoe, who has to listen to all the stories you guys tell on a second-hand basis. Thanks so much for writing, Christopher.
The second shout out for today goes to Amy Gonzalez. Hello, fellas. I'm a loyal podcast listener and would love a birthday shout out for this coming podcast.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday,
Happy
Amy
birthday.
Gonzalez. And shout out to your man, JR, because in a previous email, you asked for a shout out to him as well. And I don't think we got to that one.
Also said, I'd love to thank Noel for the Il Popa voice.
I have to say, Amy, this brightened my day and justified that stupid voice that Ben makes me do, that we came up with, whilst, having a little cocktail, of a night after work. So,
it's a great voice.
Amy, I bless you, Amy. You are a good soul. You have a very kind heart, and may God be with you.
Who's next?
The final shout out goes to Jonathan V. Jonathan says he found us listening to Josh and Chuck. Well, that's cool. Apparently they shouted us out. He has concerns about Pokemon Go. As we kind of mentioned, there are a lot of concerns about the game.
Only concern I have is when I'm going to get a dang Bulbasaur.
What level are you right now?
7, man. I'm way behind. Everyone else in the office is like 20 something.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Well, I'm currently level 0. I haven't started yet. Diana, my wife, tells me I need to. He says, with metadata picking out individuals and selling unique data, it might be possible, but not so cost effective to monetize. However, when you fit a demographic and you need a Squirtle, how much value is there to a particular store or location in having a Squirtle when they know that within Pokemon Go, you need one? That's interesting. So the idea of strategically placed Pokemon to get people into brick and mortar stores.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
He says he's listening in exile in Germany, and thank you.
And that concludes... But wait, you might be saying, what about my email? What about my tweet? One that I want to send you guys to let you and my fellow listeners know about something going on in my neck of the global woods. We would love to hear from you, and we're pretty easy to find nowadays. We're not an anonymous WikiLeaks source. We are on Facebook and Twitter, where we are Conspiracy Stuff. We are on Instagram, where we are Conspiracy Stuff Show. If you liked this podcast or this information, check out our earlier podcast on WikiLeaks. You can find it along with every single other audio podcast we've ever done on our website, stufftheydon'twantyoutoKnow.com. And if none of that...
And that's the end of this classic episode. If you have any thoughts or questions about this episode, you can get into contact with us in a number of different ways. One of the best is to give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. If you don't want to do that, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.